Hello and welcome to our talk, Ethical Hacking for a Safer Internet. My name is Tim Philipp Schäfers, and today we will talk about criminal law in regards of computer crime. And I'm the co-founder of Mint Secure. We are also doing ethical hacking, and yeah, happy to be here today with Caro.
My name is Caroline Kote. I'm a trained lawyer. I'm also doing the software development in my law firm. I'm also dealing with questions of standardization and citizen knowledge as part of my role at the Liquid Legal Institute. So we will examine today the legal patchwork concerning the treatment of ethical hacking in different jurisdictions and want to kind of show you how a harmonized framework could look like that empowers ethical hackers to strengthen our IT landscape. We will proceed in 4 steps, which is first defining what hacking and ethical hacking actually means, to start with a common ontology for our talk. Then we will continue with kind of emphasizing the importance of external hackers as indispensable. And then we will continue showing you the main differences in jurisdictions in Europe. Last but not least, we will envision how an ideal legal framework could look like as a start of a little discussion. So, what is ethical hacking? Hacking has a negative connotation, a negative narrative to it. But what it actually means is that we just do the systematic test to uncover security vulnerabilities in systems and applications, in networks. And to judge the actual act, we have to look at the intent, we have to look at the authorization, we have to look at the methods that the hacker actually used. So what people usually have in mind when they think of hacking is this kind of malicious act, making somebody seeks private gain, sabotage, theft. But there's also ethical hacking, and we can even distinguish ethical hacking in 2 subtypes. The one that is authorized, meaning companies that actually hire penetration test teams or do bug bounty programs to invite external testers to actually bake their defenses. And then we have the other, even more highly debatable group, which doesn't have these individual contracts, but actually is just working without seeking financial benefit, but doing it out of society's reason, society's interest. And because of that, we will actually show you the disclosure policies that all these hackers, no matter what kind of ethical hacking group you belong to, will look like. But first we want to emphasize why we're actually having this talk. So there's an increasing surge in cybercrime, and with that comes a high increase of costs. And we do not only mean the monetary cost to it, but also the intangible risk. And that is actually why the regulators already have recognized it, that they have recognized that it's the need to put pressure on companies to invest in their security systems. And especially we have seen this in the NIS2 directive, which even states that the majority of disclosure reports come actually from external testers. And the market reinforces this. So there are already plenty of companies that invest heavily in bug bounty programs where they pay those who report responsibly. And we also see this with an increase of open source usage. Because open source relies on so many eyes, they take this kind of expertise of different people, which know different kind of security vulnerabilities, to then build up the higher security barriers. So crowdsource defense works, and open source is a living proof of that. Still, already this kind of discussion is going on for quite a while already. And to make an example of that, I can hand over to Tim to give you one of these examples.
Yeah, thank you very much, Caro. Actually, here you can see a testimony from the Loft hacker collective. It's kind of the first times where hackers were in direct exchange with politicians, and as you can see, this is still a while ago. And at that time, it was kind of the first remarks where it was mentioned that there is certain critical infrastructure, that there is a real harm that can exist there. But actually, not that much has changed in regards of how the media perceives hackers in general. As Caro mentioned, this is very often connotated with a negative framing. And yeah, actually, we kind of want to flip that and also want to emphasize that hacking is also a possibility to enhance security. And very often one can hear that hacking is malicious or something, but actually if we look back at the so-called hacker ethic, we see that even within this community there's a huge yeah, understanding how to act and how to act morally. Here you can see an excerpt from the so-called hacker ethic, which basically describes how you should work as a real hacker. And there you can see again that, for example, the idea of breaking things to enhance them and to make them even more secure is very yeah, basic principle, which is already there. Furthermore, that you should not litter with others people's data and also use public data and protect private data. So this is really yeah, common ground and understanding. In the 1980s, this was first kind of proposed and discussed, and later on it was extended by the Chaos Computer Club, for example, where yeah, many people thought about, okay, how can we handle hacking, or what is really good hacking in that regards. And to my personal understanding, it's really important to understand that breaking things always some kind helps of fixing things. We also have a few examples here, which might be familiar for you or not. I just want to briefly mention a few of those things. Actually, there was a so-called Heartbleed bug, which was a security vulnerability within OpenSSL, which is used for transport layer security. And in 2014, there was a serious vulnerability in that software, which is basically used by yeah, a lot of web servers on the internet. Probably when you enter a website and enter HTTPS, this software is used on the server side to encrypt certain connections. And the good thing is that people very often find these bugs, report these bugs, and that they can fix. This is mostly how yeah, open source software, for example, is secured. There's also the principle that you don't disclose any information about the security vulnerability before it is fixed. This is also closely related to the hacker ethic you have seen before. Furthermore, a second example is, for example, the so-called DEF CON voting village. DEF CON is a security conference in the US, and there is a basic idea that, for example, voting machines are hardly tested by hackers to see whether they are secure or not. And of course, this also helps to enhance the security at that point and to make sure that those components are secured. As Caro mentioned before, for example, the NIS2 directive also aims in the direction of saying, okay, it makes sense to break certain things and fix them afterwards. This is, yeah, the basic enhancement process, I would say. And the third example here is from a Taiwanese hacktivist group. And to me, this is also very important because a lot of people think in regards of hacking always from the technical standpoint. But for a lot of hackers, and also for me personal, hacking also is yeah, handling information responsibly. And in this case, for example, people were able to make use of public information and APIs and yeah, made a more user-friendly way to disclose information. This is very often also something that hackers do. So just to give you a few examples, what can be done with hacking, and this is just a short excerpt. There are many more examples where security of software and products were enhanced in the past also by yeah, certain peoples, hacker collectives, and so on. And now I would hand over to Caro so that we look at certain legal examples.
So after Tim told you about the disclosure policies, you might think that if you follow those policies, you are not treated as a criminal. Yet statutory certainty is quite rare for ethical hackers. Most countries still equate ethical hacking with criminals. And we had a referendum in Germany, which was actually including this distinction and saying, we have IT researchers, we have other ethical hackers who don't do it as their job, who are not commissioned, but still want to do something for the greater good. And we also have a differentiation in that referendum based on the intent, as mentioned previously, which is the malicious intent, which is actually distinguishing ethical hacking to malicious hacking. However, due to the early elections, the referendum wasn't passed, so due to that, and due to the fact that usually companies act internationally, meaning their software is internationally used, meaning we have always different jurisdictions affected, we actually had a look into the other countries. And we did found one good example, one rare example in the Polish penal code, which actually explicitly supports ethical hacking in the sense that it says no offense is committed if you do it solely on the purpose of securing a system. And however, this is kind of a unicorn regulation because other states don't do this differentiation. They equate ethical hacking with malicious hacking on the first place. So I can hand over to Tim what it actually means in practice if you equate malicious hacking with ethical hacking.
Yeah. So in general, one potentially can imagine that it's combined with a lot of emotional pressure also when you find, for example, a certain vulnerability, but you are unsure whether this is fully covered by the law and how to potentially report this. So what we see is that ethical hackers often are threatened by the classical legal system or how the laws are working. And from my perspective, the core question is whether we want this, so that also ethical hackers are put under pressure or don't know how to report certain vulnerabilities, or if it doesn't make more sense to say, hey, please hack public systems to secure them, to responsibly report this. There are some computer emergency response teams around the world that also receive reports and handle them. And in a few cases, of course, it helps to make systems even more secure. In other cases, there was also the case that certain hackers got a little bit of legal pressure and were not able to disclose or talk a lot about these topics.
So to understand the main differences between the jurisdictions and how they treat ethical hacking, we need to clarify, at least on a brief level first, what actually makes an act a crime and when it will be punished and when it will be prosecuted. So a crime usually has two conditions to it. The first one is, did you fulfill all the elements of the offense that is stated by the law? And the second one is this act deemed lawful or unlawful? And it is unlawful if you lack any kind of legal justification for it, as we mentioned, the authorization at the start. So let's have a look at the main differences in the jurisdictions, starting from the act itself. So actually, we have in every kind of jurisdictions some variants of I'm accessing and altering, interfering with the system, I'm interfering with data. But what we also have is that some countries, but not all of them, have an additional bypassing of security measures in their samples, and we also have the element of authorization, sometimes as an objective element of the act, and sometimes as a justification. And as stated, that makes a huge difference, because one means that even commissioned ethical hackers committed a crime, but are justified, and the I didn't commit a crime at all kind of variation. There's another issue with the authorization, especially when it comes to third-party systems, because there is a dispute, whose authorization do I actually need to be completely covered? It could be that I'm commissioned by one company, but if I'm accidentally or cautious, by intention, accessing a third-party system, I might need another system owner's authorization too. So even commissioned hackers are already in that kind of gray area, which is obviously not what is wanted. We have also countries that have put these additional requirements that kind of put up a higher threshold to it, which is to the benefit of ethical hackers. And that one example would be Latvia, who says you need an extra substantial harm. And this kind of substantial harm, though it's kind of a vague, ambiguous term, because what does substantial actually mean? It does help ethical hackers, because especially if you see it as financial harm, this is usually not fulfilled by ethical hackers. And by that, you have this kind of distinction to it. But when we look actually onto the subjective elements of an offense, we actually see that some countries put even a better threshold that even distinguishes more between ethical hacking and malicious attacks. And that is, subject element usually says you intentionally and knowingly do what is stated in the objective offense. But if you also add the intent to harm someone or the intent to enrich yourself or a third party to the law, which is quite easily done, which was also done in the German referendum, but also, for example, Austria is doing that. This intent is actually what differentiates the ethical hacker from the malicious attacks. And by that, you kind of do this distinction, so ideal version of doing it. As stated, even if you meet all these technical requirements, the act itself could still be rendered as lawful if you have a justification reason. And most hackers argue, well, there's a state of emergency for this personal data, or there's a state of emergency because it's critical infrastructure, and we all kind of are dependent on that. And this is kind of highly debatable, because what means immediate? The state has happened already quite a while before. The state is there for quite a while already. And there's another even severe question to the justification reason argument, because hacking is not just one act, it's a series of actions. And the question is, what of these actions are actually covered by the justification reason? So how far can I, as a hacker, actually go, and how far is too far? What is actually required? But after all these issues, we want to mention one good thing, kind of at least, which is that most countries that till that point still equate ethical hacking and malicious attacks actually do not convict or prosecute. And we see, for example, in the US and in France, that there are public enforcement descriptives, like you can actually see on, for example, for the USA, on the Justice Government website, where they state, as long as you follow the responsible disclosure guidelines, we won't prosecute. Or in case of France, if you report to our authority that is meant for the security, well, then you have a safe harbor, we won't tell your name, even if some kind of complaint is filed. As said, you still have committed a crime. And it's just not kind of prosecuted. And this comes also with a little kind of snippet to it, because what hackers, especially ethical hackers, like to do is use that, what they have done, for educational purposes and kind of publish it. And they are not allowed to do that. As soon as they do, all this kind of on-hold procedure is gone. And that is also not helpful, because we want people to publish what could be a security vulnerability and exchange on that. So, to sum it up, we have basically 4 different legal approaches. We have that explicit statutory support, like in Poland, where we already have in the law this kind of framing of ethical hackers are not seen as criminals, optimal version. Then we have the second kind of favorable version of putting additional requirements to it that are rarely fulfilled by ethical hackers. Also good. Not optimal, because we kind of like that reframing of the first version. And then we have the prosecution directives, meaning, as stated, for example, for France, creating this kind of safe harbor to it. The last one, which is still happening in most of the countries, is the least favorable one, because it lets the hacker rely on justification reasons. It lets basically the interpretation of different judges. He never knows what is going to happen. And then we also have the have the thing that the prosecution investigation is still ongoing, meaning that they might face hardware seizures, they might face mental load of legal battles, they might even face reputational loss, which is especially affecting those who have another business as IT researchers to it. And leaving me up to that one, I can hand over to Tim and ask him what his wish list for an ideal legal framework would be.
Yeah, actually we thought about, okay, what might be helpful, and for a better legal framework we have outlined at least 4 things that are important. On the one hand, this legal certainty needs to be established, so what Caro mentioned, that in a lot of cases ethical hackers report something, maybe a case is opened or not, but yeah, it would be great if it would be very clearer, so that you really know, okay, where is it possible to responsibly report certain security vulnerabilities and how to act in the legal framework. Then there's another point, is explicit immunity. So like we heard about safe harbor regulations, that this is really stated in the law, that you are allowed to report certain security vulnerabilities. As mentioned before, a lot of computer emergency response teams around the world say, hey, please report us security vulnerabilities. But in the law, this case is not existing at all. So that is very important that also the lawmaker understands, okay, it makes sense, and that ethical hacking helps to secure systems and enhance security of companies and for the society, for our society in general. Then this reframing of hacking, so that this is not just a negative approach, or that hacking harms certain people or system, but that is also very positive. Also in the media, as mentioned before, you can see that very often the term hacker is connotated negatively, but from our perspective, this must not be the case. It's more the question how we perceive this and how those people really act, and there's also a way of acting responsibly. And then the differentiation, as mentioned before, between ethical hacking and malicious actors. This is really important, and in a lot of cases not the case in the law itself. So it just describes hacking as a bad thing, which might be something from the past and where we need to reframe this. Then some general actions, or something we wish from your side. On the one hand, that you potentially collect these points about a better legal framework, also in discussions within your company, maybe also with lawmakers, that you kind of share the idea and describe why it makes sense to differentiate between malicious activities and ethical activities. Then a harmonized regulation would make sense, because even if some countries adapt a change, the problem exists that if you, for example, find a certain security vulnerability in a software, it might be used in a lot of different countries and jurisdictions, which is also a problem, because if you, as an ethical hacker, report a certain vulnerability in one country, and then you report it in another country, and one country has a stricter hacking law, so to say, then you would face legal problems. So it would make a lot of sense to have a harmonization on the regulation and the reporting ways in that regard. And in general, that's also why we are giving the talk here, is to have a greater public awareness and empathy about those topics, so that it can be discussed. Because the ultimate goal from our perspective is that we really tackle security vulnerabilities, make it hackers even harder to break systems, and for that a stronger collaboration between the private sector, the ethical hacking community, and even the government is needed to enhance the security level. Because from our perspective, nowadays sometimes they are still in their corner, so maybe the government is saying, hey, we need to prosecute hackers, because as we have seen, cybercrime is a big topic. Then the hacking community tries to do certain things, tries to improve software with open source projects, as we have heard. And of course, also the private companies have an interest in regards of really prosecute malicious intents, but maybe also, as Caro mentioned, with bug bounty programs, have a reward for ethical hacking and really use it as a driving force, which can help us to secure systems. Yeah, that maybe as an overview. So thank you very much. We would have the possibility for 1 or 2 questions, if there are any from the public, so to say. So thank you very much. So are there any questions or examples? So we have one here in the front. Thank you.
Not really an example, but just a question. See, I gather you are German. Do you have any idea where this is going in Germany? Tried that referendum, which didn't fly, I understand. Any other progress in sight?
Actually, we have a new government, and they also put this in the plan for the next years, so to say. So my hope is that over the next couple of years we will see some progress there, but the current or the last referendum thing now is gone, so it needs to be built up completely new, which is really important for our point of view, because the German law explicitly not differentiates between ethical hacking and malicious attempts there. Yeah.
The referendum, I think, ran there, as I talked about it. The referendum that was there before the election actually included an exception for people who do it solely for the purpose of securing a system, and has this additional intent as a requirement. But it's a little bit still up to debate if that's just an acceptable or even ideal solution, because what they did is they just added a paragraph to it and said not authorized is seen if, and that might seem like kind of like simple, like why does it matter? But some argue that this is actually putting a point on the question of who needs to prove what. Do I need now, as some ethical hackers read that as, do I now need to prove that I didn't have a malicious intent? And in my view, that is not the case, because in Germany, you have the principle of the prosecutor needing to prove the stuff, and usually you have, when it comes to prosecution and they need to prove if you had a certain intent, then prosecutors will have a hard time struggling that you had this kind of intent of enrichment or its intent of harming someone. Especially, there's one little exception to that, because sometimes ethical hackers are a little bit uncautious with their wording in their reports and ask for, well, I would be happy if you would give me a reward for finding your vulnerability, and that could cause some suspicion. But except that, I think it's fine.
Hi, yeah, thanks for the excellent presentation. I already raised my hand like a few minutes ago and you started answering my question already, but I was wondering about this intent requirement, as you were just talking about, because I was wondering if it doesn't maybe expose security researchers maybe to intrusive surveillance practices to like figure out if there was malicious intent. I was just wondering if you have any knowledge of something like this going on, or whether this is not possible under the current laws.
Actually, as Caro described, very often there are cases that are opened, and when a case is opened, there's an uncertainty for the people that are affected by that, and that could also mean for security researchers that they might be under surveillance, so to say, because somebody might need to find out, okay, what are they doing, why are they doing this, are they acting on their own, and so on. Yeah, that's why we need a clearer regulation on that, to make sure that people are not threatened, that people responsibly can report it and have kind of a peace of mind in what they're doing, because they are securing certain systems which are very important to us.
Yeah. That's why we graded the prosecution approach a little bit lower, because that means that there is already investigation if you had this intent, if you're acting in good faith, if you have followed all the responsible disclosure guidelines, and that could, in practice, we actually know that this basically is you getting called, what did you do, what was your intention, and if they are then fine with you, then it's good to go, but that is already causing a hard race for the ethical hacker itself, because he knows he's part of this prosecution, investigation.
Hi, I'm Yannick. I used to work in the industry, and what I saw at that time when I worked there, that it's also a matter of brain drain, because people would go rather in the black hat direction and not in the white hat direction, just exclusively working over the onion net or something. Would you say that it's the case for today as well, or is it in a better state?
I mean, in some cases, it makes sense to report security vulnerabilities anonymous because you want to have your name attached to this. I know certain cases where this happened. But from my perspective, it's very sad that things like that are needed, or that security researchers might hide their activity behind the onion network or things like that, because it should be legal, because it really helps us to secure certain systems. And from my perspective, it's really something from the past that you say, okay, this is just illegal activity and needs to be prosecuted, because we have learned a lot through hacking to understanding how the world and systems work and how to improve them, because, I mean, every human makes mistakes, every program or computer can make mistakes, so it makes sense to recognize this and to change it to the better in regards of hacking in general, and maybe also to the law in that case. Okay, I think then we are fine. Thank you very much for having us, and have a nice day.